I'm taken with a number of aspects of the Minister's contributions in his speech there, but in particular the contribution that suggested that the government is not tabling the counter-motion because of willing to provide practical solutions, and suggest that this motion is somewhat doesn't aim to do so. I have another alternative view as to why the government is not providing a counter-motion, and it was one that was reported in yesterday's newspapers, that they intend not to provide a counter-motion as they intend to let this motion pass and sit in their hands and do nothing anyway. The Commission of Investigation, this Commission will dissolve unless the government extends it. Sitting on your hands is enabling the state to further become complicit in the dissolution of a commission that has added to the re-traumatisation of those it set out to give dignity and truth to. And when you sit in your hands and do nothing, you become complicit. And what I've seen over the last number of months since this issue re-emerged, since the government forced through legislation in October, is how the descent into complicity, and how people who I fundamentally believe are good and who have good intentions become complicit in the continuum of abuse and state-sponsored incarceration and horror that has been endemic in this state, that is magnified to its most in terms of the realities and the historical abuses of mother and baby homes. And what we're seeing now, and what we'll see tomorrow when government representatives sit on their hands and do nothing as a way of absolving themselves from blame, is a further testimony to that. And I want to call her out now because it's wrong. And those who will sit here and claim that they are somewhat confused, or they feel guilty and yet do nothing anyway, they're worse. They're absolutely worse in my view. We know the histories now. We have heard the stories of abuse. We have seen the re-traumatisation of victims. We have survivors standing for it now who have every right to take a judicial review, and still this government is closing their eyes and being patronising and saying that we will work with you, we will do this. And at every step of the way, we've had people, good people, standing in this chamber and asking us to trust them, and at every step of the way they've had to be dragged to doing the right thing. And that's happened on a number of occasions. Only in the last couple of months we had the Minister telling us that GDPR rights didn't apply here. We had to stand up, survivors had to stand up, activists had to stand up and call foul on that, and then all of a sudden GDPR did apply. We said there wouldn't be access to the archives, and people again had to mobilise, had to come out and relive their traumas, go on to national airways and say, well, this was important, and then all of a sudden there would be access to archives. And then in the last week, and then in the last couple of weeks, and right up until last night almost, we had the situation where people who, in my eyes, are very competent, decent and want to do the right thing are following the state's line and the line of the institutions of power in this country, and saying that testimony was irretrievable, testimony was gone. 550 testimonies of abuse, incarceration, suffering of the most horrific extent had been gone. And willingly going on to national airwaves, coming into Parliament and saying that these documents had been gone, and then all of a sudden at the very last moment changing their mind once again. I am fascinated by this descent into complicity, and I'm wondering, is that how power works? Is that how we become manipulated? Is that how we become part of the continuation of abuse and suffering by people in this state towards victims who've done no wrong? And I think it's wrong, and I think what we'll see today and what we'll see tomorrow, when people who would say that they are morally conflicted will sit on their hands and do nothing and watch the dissolution of a commission which needs to stay because its work is not yet finished. If we want to remember where we are at this point, we have to go back to why we started in the first place. And this started because 796 bodies of babies were found in Tuam, and then we had a situation where public outcry resorted in politicians coming into the Dáil and saying that we're going to aspire to do better. And the mechanism by which we aspired to do better was to begin another commission of investigation. And what that commission of investigation has now appeared to be was just a way of stopping public hostility at a point where it was going to really take hold in terms of calling for truth and calling for justice. So we had a commission that went on for years, and when the report came back, there was the worst thing that can emerge from a commission of this such. Victims standing forward and saying actually their truth was at best not presented clearly, at worst manipulated to serve a particular agenda. And I want to highlight some of the work that has been done by Dr. Maeve O'Rourke, who's been incredible over the past couple of years in terms of standing for truth and justice. Some of the Commission finds, for example, arbitrary detention. There are no recommendations for redress for arbitrary detention. It's horrific, absolutely horrific. Don't tell those survivors, those victims, that you weren't arbitrarily detained. The fact that a Commission was able to find that is wrong. We cannot stand over that. Forced labour. The Commission recommends that Magdalen laundry-like redress should be available only for women in county homes, women in Tuam, women who worked outside the institutions without pay, and for nobody else. Unlawful and unregulated family separation. The Commission makes no recommendation at all for redress of unlawful or unregulated separation of mothers and children. That's horrific. That's absolutely horrific. The Commission found very little evidence that children were forcibly taken from their mothers. It accepts mothers did not have much choice, but that is not the same as forced adoption. How we create words, how we put words on the paper, have meaning, and they cause harm. And I can't believe that we would tell survivors that though their children were forcibly taken from them, that was not the same as forced adoption. It's a cruel manipulation of words. Harm caused to children in unsupervised car situations following their separation from their mother, including through boarding and domestic. The Commission makes no recommendation for redress for harm caused to boarded out children. As this Commission dissolves now, Minister, there will be cases taken to judicial review. Who can these victims, who we've told that they suffered, their experience, that they've verbalised, their traumas that they've had to relive, when they want to challenge these findings, how can they do so as your Commission, as you allow this Commission to dissolve? I think that's a question we need to ask ourselves. I think the question you need to ask yourself, Minister. I think it's a question that every single government rep who intends to sit in their hands and do nothing tomorrow when the vote comes along needs to ask themselves. As this Commission dissolves, are you further enabling yourself to be complicit in the re-traumatisation of victims and the continuation of their abuse? Because all along, since the foundation of the state, right through these mother and baby homes, right through the history of institutional abuse, incarceration, forced separation, all the way along there was people who stood up and believed themselves to be good. And there was people who enabled them to do so, all the while they committed these horrors. For example, when the Taoiseach stood in this chamber a couple of months ago and apologised on behalf of society and invoked societal complicity as a way of diluting the state's role and the church's role, this is another example. In 20 years' time, when we, or 10 years' time, when we fully realise the extent of allowing this Commission to dissolve without forcibly finishing its job, or are we going to say that, again, society was complicit in this? Because it wasn't. Because I tell you now, it was society that ensured that these documents were retrieved. It was society that ensured that the government wasn't able to cover up. This is an example of all the way through society saying no and state still forcing its agenda. And we see that through a multitude of forms. Yesterday in the Irish Times, we seen a genuinely wrong scenario where a representative of the Commission invoked moral and legal authority in terms of saying that these same records, which you're now standing here proudly saying have been retrieved, and the Commission have done a good job in doing so, a representative of that same Commission yesterday gave quotes to the Irish Times and invoked moral authority. In this age, in 2021, when we've come to a full realisation, or almost a full realisation of the horrors, we still enabled a powerful person in the state to invoke moral authority. There is no grounds for anyone who is a representative of this state to invoke moral authority when we talk about or try to become further the cover-up of silence in this country to invoke moral authority. There's no grounds for it. Minister, there's no grounds for trust here. We've failed survivors time and time again, and tomorrow the government will fail them again when it sits on its hands, does nothing, and allows the Commission to dissolve. We have no right to ask for trust. So what we're calling for is an extension of the Commission because its job is not yet finished. And there is a further job that needs to be added to that, and that's accountability. And nobody gets to walk away, wash their hands and say their job is done or survivors are being re-traumatised to this even now. Thank you.